Good evening all. On behalf of Nagpur IMA, I welcome you all to this webinar on COVID-19. The situation is grave. Like thousands of patients are there every day in Nagpur, and that's why we thought of taking this seminar on COVID, how to fight with COVID, what precautions we have to take in our OPD, IPD, what are the implications of the antigen test or RT-PCR, where to do, what to do, and all these questions which come to the private practitioner while practicing, these we will be solving in this panel discussion. We have a very eminent speakers on this panel today. I would like to introduce them first. We have Dr. Anand Kate sir. He is a senior consultant, physician and consultant in critical care and internal medicine. He is past president of IMA Nagpur and at present secretary of API of Vidarbha chapter. He received Best Secretary Award, Best Secretary, Best Branch Award in 2003 at IMA-MS and Best President Award in 2006 at IMA Maharashtra State level. Also, Best Branch Award he received in 2006. Right now, he is chairman of IMA PPS, a very dynamic leader of our Nagpur IMA, Dr. Anand Kate. We have second panelist as Dr. P.P. Joshi sir. He is professor and head of the Department of General Medicine, AIIMS Nagpur. He is right now appointed as a nodal clinical expert for Maharashtra on clinical management of COVID-19. He was past president of Diabetic Association. He was president of Academy of Medical Sciences. He has more than 35 years of experience as medical teacher. He is right now also my teacher. We used to attend P.P. Joshi sir के classes है क्या चलो भाग भाग के जाते थे और attend करते थे. Sir must not be remembering, but we remember you sir very well. More than 182 research publications. He is on the editorial board in numerous journals. Where a long CV which is difficult to read in 2 minutes. We welcome you sir to this webinar.
Thank you.
We have Dr. Archana Deshpande as one more panelist. She is associate professor of Department of Medicine GMC Nagpur. She has also a teaching experience of more than 24 years. Many publications to her credit in national and international journals. She is on the editorial board of member of Vidarbha Journal of Internal Medicine. Murti Lahan Pan Kirti Mahan, a favorite teacher of all postgraduate students and a very good friend of mine. The fourth panelist is Dr. Nirmal Jaiswal. He is a renowned physician and intensivist and critical care consultant. He is director and chief intensivist at Shuatek Hospital and Research Institute, Dhantoli. He is ICU director and chief at Crescent Hospital, Dhantoli, at Bokard Hospital also, and presently he is managing the show at Bokard Hospital as a COVID consultant also. He has also presented many papers in many national and international conferences. A very simple, humble and sincere person I know. We started the practice together, so we carry a different bond with Nirmal. Then we have a very versatile speaker, Dr. Meena Mishra. She is a professor and head of the Department of Microbiology at All India Institute of Medical Sciences, Nagpur. She has set up a molecular diagnostic lab for COVID-19 testing at AIIMS. She is faculty in medical education technology, published 19 research papers in various reputed journals, won the outstanding president of Zone 9 of JCIS in 2001, and she was felicitated by LIC for outstanding contribution in professional excellence by giving Professional Excellency Award. She has won Ravi Puraskar Award by JCIS also. So we have all learned consultants as panelists. Also, we are having one more person here, Dr. Prakash Dev. He is right now is a convener of district task force, and he would like to talk a few words before starting this webinar. I would invite Dr. Prakash Dev sir for this webinar to say few words.
Let me at the outset congratulate Archana Kothari, our president of IMA Nagpur, to take this initiative. And before we go ahead on the technical session, let me share with you, Archana has taken over the charge of IMA Nagpur at a very critical stage, and without any breathing time, from day one, she has started working on this issue of COVID, right from this Atma Sanman Divas, discussing with government officers, then continuing education of small branches of IMA, organizing blood donation camps, and we really need to appreciate her. One more issue I would like to take to discuss with you. She was the first person or the leader who took the Association of Microbiology and Pathology to the government officers to see how the pathologists and microbiologists can be involved in rapid antigen test. And I was working with her, and through her leadership and initiative, at one point of time, the divisional commissioner was also convinced to increase the rates of rapid antigen test. In fact, he has issued the orders also, but somehow or the other, the government issued different orders. Anyway, that's a different issue. But we really need to support to her for all these activities within the limited resources, the way she has been working for IMA and for all members of the IMA. And the most important, today we have specialties from different categories. We have physicians who have the first-hand experience from the medical college. We have the physician who has the first-hand experience of working in the private sector or the corporate hospital, and we have Dr. Anand Kant, a physician who is dealing with patients coming to him, and also Meena Mishra as a microbiologist. Basically, I am not a physician, I am a public health specialist. So this particular webinar would be a good opportunity for us, and whatever transpires during this webinar and the recommendations of this webinar under the leadership of our President Archana Kothari, I assure you that we'll take up all those issues where some administrative or procedural actions are required to the divisional commissioner, to the collector, and also to the municipal commissioner. So I wish you all, and once again congratulate Archana for your initiative. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your kind words. I forgot to introduce our moderator. We have two moderators today because it's a panel discussion. Dr. Rafat Khan sir, he is a senior ophthalmologist and senior member of our IMA, past vice president, along with Dr. Prakash Dev. He was in the 2019-20 team. And Gauri Arora, she is a consultant anesthetist, and right now she is vice president of Nagpur IMA. She will be moderating this session. And we have one more person, Mr. Deepen Mehta. He is from DigiShield, who is organizing this show for us and who has supported IMA Nagpur for organizing this webinar. So we thank Mr. Deepen also. And before the start of panel discussion, I think P.P. Joshi sir want to share some slides, and then we will go for the panel discussion. Is it okay, sir?
Is it necessary for me to stop here, or we should go with the panel discussion directly? What is
sir, in panel we have taken all basic questions also.
I think that
because we have included many general practitioners in this today. So for some they are very basic, for some they are very important. So
I think
the questions are like that. And we will be coming with one more webinar uh, in next week also, again on COVID, with some more issues.
okay.
So
I think it is better that we start with the
this time we will be taking basic things. If you want to cover something, sir, you can share your screen and tell during that question answer session also. You
Yes,
can take more time also for answering your questions.
No
There will
problem.
be
I
no
think
issue.
we
No
should
problem.
go ahead with the panel discussion. Yes.
Yeah. So I now hand over this platform to Dr. Gauri Arora and Dr. Rafat Khan, sir.
A very good evening to all of you. For almost last 6 months, we all are dealing with this global pandemic crisis due to the coronavirus. Since this is a new and evolving problem, every day we are faced with new guidelines, new regulations, and new treatment protocols. There is a plethora of information, but at the same time, there are a lot of confusions also. So today we will try to get our confusions cleared and get the answers of some of the difficult questions from our expert panelists. I once again welcome our respected panelists in this webinar. So I will request the audience to please put their questions in the chat box if they have any, which shall be answered later on at the end of the session. So let me begin with a very basic question, sir. This question is for P.P. Joshi, sir. Sir, is coronavirus disease transmission airborne? Because there has been very recently, there has been a controversy regarding this. So we would like to know the answer from you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for the and good evening to you and everybody. Should I go into the screen? No. Okay. Whether it was initially thought that coronavirus or COVID-19 is basically transmitted from one person to another and it is airborne. Therefore, the advocacy of masks and everything. But it is now very clear that it is not only the transmission of this virus basically occurs through contact and droplet infection, infection. So when a person comes in contact with a person within a meter or 1 meter distance, and when a person talks or when he coughs, or infected person talks or he coughs or he sneezes, he exhales out, emits droplets, and these droplets are present in the air for some time, and then they settle down in the surrounding area. And if that person who is come in contact with that person that touches that droplets and then touches his nose and mouth, he can get infected. This is the most accepted method by which the COVID-19 spreads. But I must confess that this is we know very little about the transmission even now. And it is definitely airborne. It is not so important as airborne infection. In fact, was very common. The only method by which H1N1 and the previous SARS infection spread. But for this virus in COVID-19, this coronavirus 2, SARS virus 2, this virus has got different properties. This is much more infectious as compared to the previous SARS epidemic which we had, and it is also it spreads very rapidly. And you must have seen now that community spread has already occurred in Nagpur, and we're getting so many cases. That kind never occurred, and even the patients who are pre-symptomatic and 2 days prior to the onset of symptoms, and about 8 days or 4 to 5 days after the onset of symptoms, that is the period when the patient is maximally infectious. And therefore, if a person comes in contact with that infective person, he is likely to get it. The droplets also float in the air, so there is also a possibility of airborne infection. And if you read an article in New England Journal, there's an editorial entitled as asymptomatic infection as an Achilles heel in the control of the pandemic. And therefore, asymptomatic transmission, I think, and pre-symptomatic transmission when the person is not having any symptoms, is also a very important thing in that this disease has become a pandemic. Therefore, definitely droplet infection, direct contact with the person, and airborne infection, all are important, but I think airborne infection is not as important as it was thought to be previously. Still controversial. It's a new virus, new disease. We have heard about this virus only since last few months. There are a lot of things which are evolving. A lot of things which were told earlier have been refuted. It is still in the learning phase. Probably after 1 year, when everything becomes clear, we might be able to answer this question better. But at this point of time, contact and droplet infection and airborne infection, all ways in which the virus can spread. I think that should be okay. Thank you.
Here I would like to add something, sir. Recently, actually, I have gone through one article wherein some 239 scientists from some 32 countries, they have urged WHO to declare this as an airborne disease, as there are emerging evidences in favor of it, because that can have an impact on the healthcare professionals. And moreover, that may not, then the social distancing of 1 meter may not be sufficient. So they are just trying to find more evidences, and they have urged WHO to reconsider this. And
I think what you're saying is correct, but that is the reason why people have been asked to wear masks. Masks are basically important in patients where the infection is airborne. So, and therefore and even people who do not have, while walking on the streets also, they are asked to wear masks.
Thank you so much, sir. Sir, I have a question for Anand Kate, sir. Sir, what are the other modes of transmission? Like, is there, does it get secreted into the body fluids, the semen, the tear, the urine?
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, President IMA, Dr. Archana Kothari. Thank you, Gauri. As Dr. P.P. Joshi has told us that basically it is the droplet infection. So droplets which come out from sneezing, talking, or coughing of a patient, they fall upon various objects around us. That is what we call as fomites. The object, and it is given at different places at up to what period of time these virus survives on different fomites varies from hours to days. They survive on these fomites, and this whenever somebody else, a patient who is not infected, comes in contact with these fomites, say your door handles, your railings, your tables, chairs, so he gets the virus on his hands. He touches the hands to his face, nose, eyes, or mouth. That is the most commonest cause of transmission after what Joshi sir told as a droplet infection. So this is another mode of transmission, which is a rather more, even if you are observing social distancing, even if you are staying away from each other, this mode of transmission will go on, continue and spreading the disease. For that only, it is advised to your hand sanitization and hand washing is frequent hand washing is advised to avoid this mode of transmission. Talking about body fluids, it's also said that the body fluids are also infective, and they do transmit infections, especially saliva, your other whatever aerosols you generate, the cough and everything, they are also infective. Sexual transmission, I don't know if it is there, but it's not mentioned anywhere that there is sexual transmission of this disease through semen.
Sir, can there be transmission to the baby from an infected pregnant mother during delivery?
During delivery, it is not transmitted to the mother, and babies are usually born COVID-free when they are born, and they are even breastfeeding also is advised with all proper precautions of the mother. The mother can breastfeed the baby after the delivery.
Thank you, sir. Now I have a question for Dr. Archana Deshpande. Madam, can it be transmitted through food items?
It is not transmitted exactly through the food items, but it is always advisable to wash your foods and vegetables before using, because even it is not transmitted to hot food. So if you eat hot foods, then it is not transmitted, and there is no evidence that food is this virus is transmitted through the food. But better is you can cook the food properly and you can wash the vegetables and the fruits before its use.
And can it be transmitted from an infected individual to his domestic animal?
There are
From
no
a human
reports.
to domestic animal.
Yeah, there are some reports initially that in Wuhan it is transmitted from bats to humans, but from humans to pets transmissions reports are not available. But what they say that you like take precaution as if they are people. So keep away distance of 1 meter, do not cuddle them, do not share the food with them. And also all precautions which we take for other people should be taken for the pets also. But there are no reported things.
Even if it is transmitted to animals from us, does it cause a disease in animal? That's another question.
Yes.
So only transmission of virus from a human being to animal, I don't think it will make any difference, but probably it doesn't cause any infectious disease in animals.
I think just one small comment. I think we know very little about it. See, we had a case of twins. One young, about 2-year-old twins, and the mother was positive. One of the twins was positive. We had admitted this patient. Both of them, because the other twin could not stay alone. The patient he was also with the consent of the mother also admitted. The twin used to play with that other. Both of them used to play. At the end of this, twin was not infected at all. The other one twin who was infected, the other twin was not infected. So we really don't know why 80% of people are asymptomatic. Why some get infection after so close contact? Why some do not get it? Where do they get it? See, there are a lot of things mysterious are there. It is so, we would have expected that twin would have been positive, but then twin turned out to be negative.
Kate sir, this question is for you. Sir, is there any role of herd immunity as it we used to think?
There is, of course. In any viral infection or any epidemic infection, there is always a role of herd immunity. But to get a herd immunity, I think there is certain amount of percentage of population which has to get infected to get a herd immunity in the population. In this case, probably somewhere around 65 to 70% of the population has to get infected so that the herd immunity can be acquired. But probably in this case, there are some areas where there may be some areas where there was a high density of infection, say probably areas like in Nagpur, if you can say Satranjipura or Mominpura, where there was a high density of infection, maybe a localized herd immunity might have occurred. But to get a herd immunity in the population, you need to get infected about 65 to 70% of the people infected. But if you wait till say 70% of the people infected, I think your mortality would be very high. So another way of getting a herd immunity is by vaccination. So if you vaccinate the population properly by a mass vaccination, I think you can achieve herd immunity. That is why everybody is desperately waiting for a vaccine to be developed and brought into the market.
Sir, is going to the park safe? Because people are exercising there, people are practicing laughing therapy, so there are a lot of aerosols which are generated. And mostly people are not using a mask when they are exercising, which they should not be.
Wrong. Not using a mask is wrong, but going to the park and maintaining a distance between two people, I think that should be all right. As Dr. Joshi sir has already told you, if you maintain a distance of 3 to 6 feet apart from each other and do an exercise, that is okay. But mask is a must, because when
while exercising, one should wear a mask.
Yes, you have to wear a mask unless you are doing a very strenuous exercise that can cause a little suffocation feeling. But if you wear what happens during exercise is your expiration is a little forceful rather than your normal breathing. So this forceful expiration can cause more discharge of virus from your respiratory system. So mask is a must, and maintaining distance also is a must.
I think open areas, if you exercise, that's a very low risk area to get infection.
Yes.
The infection occurs in closed areas. If you are in one room which is closed, not well ventilated, that is the place where you get infected. In open areas, parks and otherwise, if you maintain distance, chances of getting infection are very little. They're low risk areas.
Thank you, sir. Sir, this question is for Nirmal Jaiswal, sir. Sir, in ICUs, it is really challenging to work in ICUs where COVID patients are being treated, because procedures like nebulizer treatment and the CPR and intubation, these high aerosol generating procedures are being performed. So does it pose any increased risk to the healthcare professionals, to the doctors and the nurses working over there, as far as SARS-CoV-2 infection is concerned? Is there any evidence?
Madam, can you repeat in short, what exactly you expect from me?
Sir, working in ICUs where high aerosol generating procedures are performed, does it pose any increased risk to the healthcare professionals?
Yeah, madam, basically, whatever the particularly aerosol is equal to what you call it as nebulizers, right? So nebulizers. So where the nebulizers should not be used in the ICU, because as you rightly said in the previous, all the PP Joshi sir, Anand Kate sir has already said, even you also said, whenever there is a nebulizer, when you use, it comes in the atmosphere and the health workers will get unnecessarily infected with that. So it is better to use the MDIs rather than the nebulizers, basically.
What about the high flow nasal oxygen systems?
Yeah, HFNO.
The NIVs, non-invasive ventilators.
HFNO. Initially, to start with, the concept was not to use the NIV also, because NIV also caused a lot of, it was a suspicion or maybe the postulation of the people, it will cause more harm to the health workers. But it has been over a period of time, the people are also using when the people doesn't have the HFNO with them. But as far as HFNO is concerned, is very comfortable in the up to the mild to moderate disease, because the work of breathing also goes down very nicely and the patient becomes very comfortable. So NIV is a choice nowadays, and people initially before our panel discussion, we were discussing about intubation and ventilator. We should avoid the intubation till the end, because it's a risk for the both. And at the same time, it has been found if people who have gone on a ventilator, they have a lot of high mortality. So because whatever they maintain their hemodynamics is because of their own adrenergic drive. So if you just intubate, even if you have the rapid sequencing intubation, in that scenario, the adrenergic drive goes down and patient goes for the cardiac arrest immediately, or maybe hypotension, which is irreversible almost.
Thank you very much, sir. Sir, now I will give it to
Good evening, everyone. On 31st of December 19, last year, this COVID was declared in Wuhan, and since last 7.5 months, we are struggling to find the solution for this. So, this question is for Dr. Archana Deshpande. Ma'am, you know the symptoms. In symptoms, there are fever, cough, and fatigue. These are the common symptoms. What are the other symptoms in mild, moderate, and severe cases?
It's not mild, moderate, and severe cases, means when they are developed the pneumonia, but initially the symptoms could be what you said: fever, sore throat, cough, breathlessness, myalgia, and conjunctivitis also, few of us they've done, and loss of taste and loss of
Taste and smell.
2-3 interns, they presented smell and taste also.
Yeah.
Taste also. Am I audible? My
Yes.
2-3 interns which were admitted to us, they have developed loss of taste and smell. And what they say that whenever they have a loss of taste and smell, the disease will be mild. According to the few observations, they say that the disease might be mild. And though these people, 3-4 female interns, they have a mild disease, but the RT-PCR swab after 30 days also was positive. So maybe loss of taste, smell, fever, sore throat, myalgia. One of my colleagues who has recently done her COVID duty, she had only paraspinal muscle spasm. So like myalgia, she did not develop any sore throat or any other thing. So myalgia and fever, sore throat, cough, and conjunctivitis. These are the few things which are observed in our patients, like what the patients are admitted in the GMC. So these are the things. Arthralgia can also be the thing, but most commonly fever, cough, myalgia, loss of taste and smell. These are the usual symptoms these patients they develop.
Okay. Where these symptoms are not at all there? Yes, sir. Sir, Dr. P.P. Joshi want to say something about it.
So P.P. Joshi sir के लिए एक question from me. In continuation with Archana's question, Archana's answer.
Yeah.
She said कि after 20 days also we get the RT-PCR positive. What is the significance?
40. It's not 20. It's not 20.
Okay,
It's a 40 days, sir.
I'll come to that also. But just to continue with the question of loss of taste and loss of smell, we had conducted a study where, along with the ENT department at AIIMS, where we used to go for Department of Medicine, one person and one person from ENT used to go to collect swabs from quarantine centers from high-risk contact people who were quarantined. And there we tested the sense of taste and sense of smell, both. For taste, and we had used the sweet and salt, and for this smell we had used camphor and coffee. And it was found that subjectively the number of patients who complain out of this, some of them came positive, some of them did not come out positive, and then we compared the frequency of these loss of taste in those who came positive and those who came negative, and we found that subjectively the frequency of loss of taste and loss of smell was only about 5 to 10%, but objectively when we tested for them before the test became positive, that result came, in fact, the frequency was nearly 80 to 84%. 80 to 84% of them had loss of taste and loss of smell, those who turned positive. So very high percentage of them, but they don't have a subjective complaint, but they have an objective loss. Many of them complain of metallic taste to the food, and the food which is given to these people in our AIIMS is from NCI. The quality of food is very good, but majority of patients say the food served is so bad, it is tasteless. So it's not because the food is tasteless, it's because they have lost the sensation of taste. So that is a very important symptom, and sometimes it is the early symptom in patients who have, they may be the first symptom in patients. We had very similar, and very important to understand it, it is the loss of sweet sensation which is lost. Sour sensations are not lost. Sour you can appreciate very nicely, but if you give him sweet or if you give him salty food, they are not able to appreciate. So that's a very important point. Just wanted to coming to Dr. Nirmal Jaswal, we have number of patients who turn out to be positive beyond 14 days. And it is generally considered now the ICMR has made a rule that we should not do testing. But then previously when we used to do testing, they used to be positive for a very long time. The reason is because they have probably excreting a dead virus, and the infectivity usually does not last beyond 8 days of the infection. The virus has already gone. What symptoms come off is not because of the viral virus itself, but it is because of the inflammatory response to the virus of the second and third week. But the positivity of the virus beyond 21 days or beyond 14 days is by RT-PCR is we are probably isolating a dead virus. But then there are some people who are immunocompromised and suppressed, like patients who have HIV infection or very uncontrolled diabetes and other patients of malignancy on chemotherapy. These patients may continue to shed the virus, which is live for a longer period. So we really want to know whether at the end of 14 days when the testing is done, and many times patients come to us that people, they are working in a factory and they want a certificate, they are insisting, the employers, they cannot join the duties without the RT-PCR test being negative. And therefore sometimes we despite the norms and guidelines, we have to get the test done. And in that situation, sometimes it has turned out to be positive. Then we have to really find out whether it is a dead virus, and then the best way is to do antibody test. We have to do the antibody test. Antibody test, if it is raised, then it is probably the patient is for shedding a dead virus, or we may have to do a viral culture. I don't know, but Dr. Meena Mishra would elaborate on that. A viral culture or viral isolation may tell us whether the virus is live or whether it is dead. But majority of these investigations are not needed if the patient has clinically improved and has no symptoms for 3 days, and already 14 days have occurred. We can say that patient, even if he's RT-PCR positive, we can say that he's shedding a dead virus.
I think you heard it wrong. I told that it is for 40 days, not 14 days. I just wanted to convey that though they say that its disease is mild, but even after 40 days, the RT-PCR was positive. Because as Joshi sir said that though it is for discharge policy, RT-PCR is not required. But you can imagine, we have one resident, he was positive, his lecturer denied that unless and until his swab is negative, he won't allow him to join. The problem is, though the discharge policy, we don't require any swab, but suppose I want to join my interns or my residents in whom we are very close to the contact. So everybody wants that their RT-PCR should be negative, then and then they can allow them to join. So there are some possibilities different for theoretical purpose, and when you are really working with them, the things are different with different people.
Okay.
Madam, I think we should, in these conditions, rather than going for RT-PCR tests, we should go in for their antibody detection, like IgM and IgG. If IgG antibodies, they have been developed in sufficient quantities. So I think we should consider that as the shedding of the dead bacilli. But if IgG has not appeared, and if RT-PCR is positive along with IgM antibody, then again, here we need to take a call. That is what I feel.
Yes, in
many cases,
Agreed with
in Yavatmal, madam, we had observed those cases when we were doing testing for them. And at that time, it was the policy. Until the time RT-PCR comes negative, they were not discharged. And we have almost 5 to 6 cases in which almost 12 samples were repeated and they were continuously found to be positive. But then they were asymptomatic. But at that time, the antibody testing facility was not available.
But now antibody testing facility is not available at GMC also. The kits were there, but they were sent back because of problem with the like efficacy. So there is no way at present to us to do antibody testing. Do you have in AIIMS antibody testing possible?
Antibody testing is.
We have one kit. We have sent.
Antibody testing is commercially available, and even in it is we can get it done.
Yeah.
No, the antibody testing by those cards are not allowed, but antibody testing by ELISA is allowed.
ELISA.
By the ICMR.
The question is, suppose if antibody is positive and after 14 days of RT-PCR, so that patient can be taken in non-COVID hospital for surgery?
Yes.
Again, see, it will depend. Now, officially, it is not. It has been documented that the antigen shedding normally it could take place for 28 days, and after the sufficient quantities. Now, suppose if that patient needs to be taken for surgery, then in that case, I think we should first go in for RT-PCR. It has to come negative, and if it is presence of IgG. In that condition, then we can be taken. And of course, the same rule that we applied for HIV holds true for COVID also, that every patient needs to be treated as if he or she is COVID positive. And those standard precautions, they need to be followed at all times.
A very nice question has been asked by Dr. Rafat. Basically, now considering all the discussion, RT-PCR after 10 days doesn't carry any meaning because we can have the dead virus positivity in the RT-PCR, right?
Yes.
Right. And at the same time, if the RT-PCR comes positive and IgG is positive, if the is there any harm, sir? PP Joshi sir, is there any harm in going ahead with the surgery?
No, sir. Then there is no harm. But अगर IgG अगर develop नहीं हुआ है, तो definitely we should take a call. ऐसे.
Okay.
Because sir, this is documented that almost 30 to 40% में ही बहुत अच्छे से antibody develop होता है initial phases पे, because then there are some non-responders also that we see post vaccination भी वो वैसा दिखता है. So then we really need to go in to see whether the IgG levels they have been developed properly or not.
Okay.
Yeah, I would like to ask a question to Meena Mishra, madam. Madam, actually, I had posted a patient for a major surgery, and she underwent RT-PCR, which reported inconclusive. So what does it mean? Can I take up the patient because her rapid antigen was negative? RT-PCR was inconclusive. And what I learned is many patients are now, the reports are coming as inconclusive.
Yes.
So what it actually means? Should it be repeated?
Madam, we give RT-PCR inconclusive in two conditions. Number one, if the sample collection is not proper, means sufficient amount of material has not been collected from the person. In that condition, when we do the RT-PCR, we don't detect the RNase-P enzyme. So in every RT-PCR reaction, if RNase-P is detected, it means that the sample collection is proper and that sample, the test may be positive or negative, but RNase-P has to be detected. So if RNase-P is not detected, what the guidelines tell us, we should again re-extract, again we repeat the test, but if again RNase-P is not detected, then that is reported as inconclusive. Then second condition in which we report it as inconclusive is when only E gene is positive. Now, E gene is a non-specific gene. It could be positive in other viral infections also. So in those conditions also, we need to repeat the sample after 24 hours. So what we have observed in AIIMS is that after repeat sampling after 24 hours, almost 60 to 70% of the cases they turn out to be positive if the initial value of E gene was somewhere between 30 to 32. But if it is on the higher side, then almost most of them, they turn out to be negative after 24 hours. So you should always wait for a report, the positive or the negative report.
If the antigen test is positive, it means patient is positive. There are various myths and misconceptions of it. If antigen test is positive, it is positive. If antigen test is negative, then we are not sure. Then you have to go for the RT-PCR test and confirm whether it's positive or not positive.
Archana ma'am, why in the kids we are not getting any symptoms or very mild symptoms? In children, why symptoms are very mild?
Yes, children they have some mild symptoms. But there are various hypotheses what they laid out. They say that this is regarding the ACE inhibitor, ACE receptors. So if these ACE receptors, this virus goes and attaches to those ACE receptors, the number of receptors in the children are good and they are a protective effect on the pulmonary, like respiratory symptoms. So what is disease hypothesis? Not various things are clear. But it runs a very mild course because we have a lot of deliveries in the COVID hospital. Maybe every day 4-5 sections they are done in the COVID OT. And those children come, or the babies come as a positive, but they have very mild symptoms. Few who had born with hydrocephalus or multiple congenital anomalies, or who have some premature babies, then they have a more like adults. Comorbid conditions more susceptible, which is true for the children also. But this is some hypothesis which they have laid out. As the age increases, this ACE receptors number decreases and hence the protective mechanism lost. That is the only thing what they have put forward at present.
So this question is for Dr. Anand Kate, sir. Sir, with comorbid condition like diabetes, hypertension, if suppose they are stable in this condition, are the risk is the same as the normal person, or is risk is more for the COVID?
Well, if a patient has a comorbid conditions such as diabetes, hypertension, ischemic heart disease, the risk of getting infected is same as the population, as a normal population. They get infected as anybody else can get infected. But risk of developing a severe disease usually increases if they have a comorbid condition, if they have a diabetes, if they have a hypertension, if they have a ischemic heart disease. Because as again we are saying the virus is new, we don't know much, but probably this virus affects all the system. It is a systemic infection which causes, it affects all the systems, and being a patient being a diabetes or patient having a heart disease, if the virus infects a myocardium, then there are chances of his cardiac condition deteriorating. It is known that virus also causes thrombotic phenomena in the vessels. The thrombotic phenomena in the vessels can cause pulmonary problems. It can exacerbate the myocardial problem. And of course, diabetes, having diabetes always makes you prone for getting other infections, secondary infections. So already you have a viral infection which reduces your immunity or which reduces your resistance. So you are more prone to getting secondary infections and septicemia and multi-organ failures.
Can I make a comment?
Yes,
Just
sir.
one. The problem is about comorbidities is that because the non-COVID services have been hampered because of lockdown, what has happened, people with diabetes, people with hypertension are not going to NCD clinics or going to their respective doctors to control it. And therefore, they have already uncontrolled diabetes. And if they get this uncontrolled diabetes becomes a risk factor for getting the infection. And also after the infection, there is a stress. So we see many patients who have been admitted with us with a blood sugar of 600. Why? Because they are not controlled, because they have not shown it to a doctor, and also the stress of getting the infection, the anxiety and other things causes stress, hyperglycemia increases. So this is the problem, which is comorbidities play a very important role in the prognosis of these patients. And majority of patients who have comorbidities which are not controlled, these patients are become a very important risk factor for bad prognosis and for death.
The other cause I feel is that whenever the patients, they are even controlled, when they come to us, they have one thing as Dr. Joshi said, physical, mental stress. Second is stress hyperglycemia because of this infection. And third, which we give steroids for the treatment of this COVID. So even one shot of this methylprednisone, which is very low dose, we give 40 milligram and all. So even that causes a very high level of sugars. Even COVID can cause, it causes hyponatremia, hypernatremia also. So stress hyperglycemia, physical as well as mental, as well as the drugs, as well as the as such infections which increases the thing. So all these factors, they are responsible for the uncontrolled blood sugar. Previously controlled, and as they develop to second day, third day, it's uncontrolled. Almost 400 and 500, which were very much controlled, 140 and all in that range.
Question to Meena, right?
Yes.
And PP Joshi sir also as well, and Anand Kate sir also. I'm putting a question of the common people, who is non-medico. There are only 4 to 5 centers across Nagpur to test the RT-PCR, and they are taking almost like 4 to 5 hours to go inside the chamber where they are being tested, and they are staying outside the people who have the corona, and the people also referring for the corona testing. Just सर्दी खांसी है और अपना गला चोक है तो उसको भेज देते हैं. Whether those patients are coming positive, the common people says वो लाइन में खड़े रहने की वजह से कोरोना हो जा रहा है. Is it like that?
That's true.
Yes, I think now we are last week there all patients who had fever, I had asked them to do the not the RT-PCR but rapid antigen test, and majority of them are coming positive.
Yes.
We have reached a stage now. This was not the case more than 7 days ago, but now majority of patients, even with mild sardi, khasi and fever, and we are getting them positive on antigen tests. Rapid antigen test has sensitivity only 40%, and therefore we may be missing a lot of things. I don't know.
अगर लाइन में खड़े रहने से कोरोना होगा,
लाइन में खड़े रहने से
अगर कोरोना हुआ तो वो टाइम की टेस्ट पॉजिटिव नहीं आएगी.
वो टाइम की नहीं आएगी. बराबर.
That is correct.
That is the best.
Hey, but what I also want to say something, because initially we had swine flu, and as Nirmal sir said, it is a task for getting your RT-PCR done. Though they advise any healthcare worker who is presented with any of the symptoms has to be tested, but this is very difficult for not for GMC, IGMC. We can get access, that's why it's not a problem, but for other people it's a problem. And what we used to do for swine flu, like we used to categorize as A, B, C, and the persons who are category A, we used to give them only antibiotics, and those ABCs put them on remdesivir and send them back. So कभी ये भी time आने वाला है कि patients को symptoms बता के just tell them that these are the red flag signs and home isolation. Unless and because when you ask the patient to do CBC, LFT, we have a lot of patients for screening. You ask them to do CBC, LFT, KFT. My resident goes, take the samples, take the ECGs, take the X-rays, and all these 25, 30, 40 people. You can imagine the load on us. 40 people, you have to screen, you have to categorize them and send to the CCC. And most of the interns, which we are interns or the people whom we have quarantined, initially they were negative. and they keep the both people in one room, or maybe 3-4 people in one room. So one who are negative, they will also become positive. So though they are feeling that test, isolate them, but there are a lot of problems practically. So sharing should not be there. If you really want to quarantine them, you have to be quarantined one single person in one single room, which is not done. So even other people, they are positive. So again, what they are saying, that lot of people in a crowded area waiting for the swabs and all can increase the risk to the other people also. So again, you have to rethink over it, whether to test all individuals. Test is coming positive. I agree with you. My 10 residents from the are positive. My one colleague is positive who has done COVID duty. So when you are doing COVID duty, wearing all PPE, still you are getting infected with them. So it's a more infective, but now you have to again rethink. If you are quarantine them in one room and not the 3-4 people in one room.
Okay, this question is for Dr. Nirmal Jaiswal, sir. Sir, you are treating all sort of COVID patients. So what is the usual recovery time for mild, moderate, and severe patient?
Mild, usually we don't admit nowadays because we advocate them for the home isolation. But a lot of families are with us now. We are asking them to home isolate. And practically speaking, when to admit those mild becoming moderate is by 6-minute walk test, which has been proven now. The 6-minute walk test is a good guide. When the hypoxia is occurring after the walk, then we are supposed to admit them. As far as the discharges are concerned, mild patients nowadays, for example, we are admitting those mild cases where the fever is not responding at all. And those patients usually we usually initially put them on a FabiFlu, or any physician usually put them on a FabiFlu. In spite of that, if the fever is not responding, then we straightway go with the remdesivir if the patient is having the comorbidity along with that. And fortunately, they are responding, and 6th day we are discharging them also as well. After confirming the markers, if the markers are having the downtrend, then definitely we can straightway discharge them. And on 5th day, we are asking them to do the markers again. If they are comfortable, then again, we ourselves confirm that the patient may not go for the cytokine storm.
Actually, Dafat sir, it is difficult to say the period for any patient because there are a lot of variations. Some patients, they may recover, some patients, they may take time, they may take months together, 15 days, 3 weeks and all. So even if both are in moderate, but some takes time, some takes O2, some takes without O2, without hypoxia. So the time period cannot be framed in a given patient. What we are getting a lot of patients. I think we have at present 400 patients, COVID patients positive. Out of this, almost 250 to 300 are in, we are only admitting moderate and all, and onwards. So we have all 300 patients critically ill. So a lot of patients, lot of variations, lot of recovery variations. So you cannot categorize that mild mein hai, moderate mein hai, to itne din mein jayega hi. So what our discharge? So it's variable for everybody.
That's the reason I said
Point noted, ma'am.
how the clinical response, that depends on the discharge of the patient.
Yes.
Usually, now moderate, we are also dealing with the moderate to severe disease. Our moderate cases who needs the NIV remains up to 20 days in our hospital. Yeah, and the severe cases almost like they sometimes take to almost 45 days. 45 days.
Sir, there is a question for Kate sir. Sir, what percentage of infected patients remain asymptomatic?
Pardon, I didn't hear you. Come
What
again.
percentage of patients are asymptomatic?
It is very difficult to say what percentage of patients are asymptomatic because we don't know who are positive and who are asymptomatic. But an estimate, given by WHO and ICMR, they say about 40 to 50% patients are, more than 40 to 50% patients are asymptomatic. But it's difficult to say because we never know who are positive or who are negative.
Sir, should we be testing all our IPD patients and the OPD patients?
Madam, the present policy is you should consider every patient to be positive unless proved otherwise.
Yes.
So even the authorities say ki you test all your OPD patients, you test all your IPD patients.
Yes. Perfect, sir. Perfect.
if one of my patient tests positive, what is my duty? Am I supposed to inform the municipal corporation? What is my duty?
Yesterday only I had a talk with municipal commissioner. If your patient is positive, I told him I asked him where should I send. If he is a mild case or doesn't have, or asymptomatic patient. What I was thinking, I should send it to a government facility so that they can direct him. But what he told us is that you don't need to send the patient to a government facility. You can send him home directly for home isolation and just inform the corporation about, of course, the lab already informs the corporation, but you also have to inform the corporation that such and such patient of yours in the OPD has come positive, and whatever protocol for mild patients you have, you can start the treatment and ask him for home isolation and ask his close contacts to get tested.
Right, sir. So, sir, what kind of precautions I should be taking for my staff to protect us in my small clinic or my
Well, the general precautions of social distancing, hand wash, sanitizing your hands, sanitizing your clinic, sanitizing your instruments has to be taken. But if you are seeing patients only in OPD, probably the PPE required for OPD is N95 mask, a face shield, head cover, and gloves. If that is there, I think that should be sufficient for seeing patients in the OPD. But if you are doing some invasive procedure or doing some aerosol generating procedures, probably you being an ophthalmologist, probably you go very near to the patient's face. I think you should be more careful and maybe advisable to use full PPE.
Right, sir.
Yeah, including the dental
After
surgery.
wearing that PPE, I can't see the patient otherwise. That's my problem.
I know it causes a lot of steam accumulation on the face shield. You having a specs also will create an additional problem.
Yes, yes.
But there is you have to find a way out of it.
Sir, I can add to it.
Yes.
Basically,
Yes, sir.
this is a time of our own investment for our own life.
Yeah.
So we should not compromise on our devices what we are using, right? Because like today only we lost our very great physician, a very nice, humble human being, Narendra
Yes.
Mahesh. Right? Is basically the what you call it as, if you invest on ourselves on our devices, that will definitely protect us. Because there are devices which blow the air inside your own PPE and you will not get suffocated at all. So definitely they are costly, but later on when you see as compared to the finances for the life, the corona takes away your life. So I think in my view, 1 lakh of rupees to invest on yourself, the time has come. Rather than putting in a plot or putting in anywhere, we should put ourselves in that devices. There are good devices available.
Can I
Well,
intervene?
sir,
Can I speak?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Now, having listened to all the experts, and as rightly pointed out by Dr. Joshi, that this virus is still in the infancy stage, and it really behaves like an infant. We just cannot predict the way how the virus will behave. But as on today, yes, you are all managing the cases and you have personal experiences of managing the cases in a different way. But all said and done, in the COVID hospital, the clinical judgment of a clinician is the most important. And another issue is to manage the comorbid condition. The other day I was participating in the state level task force meeting, and they were talking about dimer test, interleukin 6 test, and the limitations of this test, the negative predictivity value and everything. So as on today, what I would like to communicate very strongly, the first take home message for all the private physicians is to follow the treatment protocols that have been circulated by government of Maharashtra on 21st July. You can say that this is the standard gold protocol. Yes, there may be a lot of deficiencies as on 21st July. They are in the phase of just modifying those protocols because they are getting modified based on the experiences of physicians like Dr. Doshi, Archana Deshpande or Nirmal Jaiswal, those who are really managing the cases. But as on today, those protocols for non-symptomatic, minor symptoms patients, everybody should get access to those protocols and should follow those protocols. The second take-home message should be for all the clinicians. Majority of the say, if I am managing the cases, I am convinced that okay, I give X type of drug और मैंने ये X type of drug दिया, एंथेलमेंटिक दिया और अलग कुछ ड्रग दिया और मेरे 25 पेशेंट को कुछ नहीं हुआ. क्या मैंने हाइड्रोक्सीक्लोरोक्विन दिया, मेरे 25 में से 25 भी पेशेंट को कुछ नहीं हुआ. But what is your personal experiences has not been validated scientifically. So don't go by your personal experiences, but go by the standard treatment protocols which have been developed by the expert after thorough clinical trials and examination of the patient and management of the patient. This is my take-home message for all the private practitioners. And whenever these protocols are updated, we shall be sharing those protocols, everybody. They are available on the website of Government of Maharashtra.
I have one final comment. Sir, just with your permission, one final comment. What I would like to stress here again, okay, there is no treatment for coronavirus, for COVID-19. Whatever drugs are being used are experimental. Unfortunately, all these expensive medicines without any evidence, clinical, good evidence from good randomized control trials have become standard of care. In this situation, because alternative good medicines are not present, we are using these medicines and the patients are now demanding that we want remdesivir, give it. We want tocilizumab, give it. Even if it is costing 60,000 rupees, they are ready to shell out. But one thing which should be very clear, even in the guidelines it has been mentioned that remdesivir is an emergency use authorization. Tocilizumab is off-label use. Plasma therapy is off-label use. These are not proven medicines. The mortality benefits for remdesivir are not there. No trial has shown that it improves mortality. These are not game changers. What has happened is that favipiravir, the evidence is very, very less. There are very few randomized trials which are published. Trials will get published subsequently, and when the evidence comes, we might use them. But at this point of time, these drugs are used left and right by everyone, not only the physicians who are treating, but also the patients are demanding that these drugs stop away, and they are not at this point of time proven drugs. Now this is very unfortunate. People are spending 30,000 for remdesivir. People are spending 30,000 for tocilizumab, and the evidence. If you look at the evidence, what is the evidence for remdesivir? Only one randomized trial showed that it shortens the recovery time by 3 days. No mortality benefits. Tocilizumab, the COVACTA trial has clearly mentioned that it has no benefits. So timing of the drug, but anecdotal evidences are there. When we talk of patients who have received tocilizumab at the right time, at the right dose, they have shown dramatic improvement. I mean, if a person is going into cytokine storm, has severe high-grade fever and body ache and pain, and in that point of time, if you give tocilizumab, he says that after 8 hours he's asymptomatic, and he says, "Kya magic drug diya hai?" But if you look at clinical trials and if you look at evidence-based medicine, these drugs are experimental. This should be very clearly told to the patient, and I think this kind of the off-label practice which has become the standard of care is something a cause of worry for me.
Yes, sir. I'm really siding with PP Joshi sir also, Dev sir also. But at the same time, what the PP Joshi sir has said, like patients are demanding, right? Patients are demanding. So sometimes you get a fear whether it is have the legal problem will crop up in front of us. If we don't give, for example, in those patients who are really symptomatic, right? In that scenario, they can sue a case against us.
I don't think with the evidence, with no evidence, nobody, because it's an off-label use. I don't think legally experts anywhere in the guidelines they have shown the data is to be given. In nowhere. And in fact, when we give, there is a very clear-cut consent form that, we have to write from the patient that these are not proven drugs and still we are taking it at our own risk and all that. One-page consent, big, in Marathi also it is there.
Yes, sir, yes.
We have to take the consent. So it is not that legally we would be implicated, because legally they will ask the experts and they will say that there is no evidence. Show the evidence that remdesivir has mortality benefits. There is no evidence. Show that favipiravir has mortality benefits or it improves the patient. That is from good randomized trials. There is no evidence. Tocilizumab, no evidence. Evidence when it comes, it's okay. But at this point of time, a lot of people are using these expensive medicines with no evidence. And I'm not saying it is wrong. I'm saying that because there is no alternative medicines, we have no option to use it. But That should be made very clear, and that should be conveyed to the patient also.
Joshi sir, what about HCQS and ivermectin?
Ivermectin has found, we have done a trial on ivermectin, it's continuing, but ivermectin evidence is very weak, very weak. For HCQS, there have been a number of trials which have been published in New England Journal Lancet in various groups. They have been used in high-risk contacts, whether they go on to develop COVID-19. Then they have been used in mild cases and all sorts of settings. It has been used. No trial, in fact, has shown that HCQS works. Now, but the evidence from the ICMR data, from the IDSP portal, that has shown that it is useful. And that unfortunately has not been published very well. And in fact, in our VC with Vinod Paul, who is the chairman, who is the member of the Niti Committee and also chairman of the Board of Governors, he has pleaded and he said that please don't stop using HCQS. HCQS will help, and our data of the ICMR shows that it helps. So basically, what is happening is that HCQS is a cheap drug, and ivermectin is a cheap drug, and these remdesivir, favipiravir, and tocilizumab are pharma-driven, and they are very expensive drugs. These drugs will push the inexpensive drug into the background. This is what the impression is. I'm not saying
using of hydroxychloroquine has not been stopped as a pre or post exposure prophylaxis. It is still being used.
It is still being used, and ICMR still advocates that we should use it.
Even ICMR tells us in its protocol also, but nobody cognizance of it.
There is a
Even protocol also, even moderate, it says. How many of you are taking hydroxychloroquine as a prophylaxis? Those who are present here.
I'm taking.
Yes,
I have to ask that question.
You are continuing since how many weeks?
More than 3 months.
3 months.
I had stopped it intermittently with the community spread.
Almost 3 months now.
Almost 3 months now.
What 3 months? Actually, because what I feel is that whenever it is an endemic, so you should continue it as a weekly prophylaxis, unless and until the endemic state is
What is
over.
the protocol for how long we should be taking?
Doesn't make any sense.
You have to.
The pandemic is continuing. I think you should take 400 milligrams weekly.
So what is the recommended dosage
I
for
also agree with
prophylaxis?
you.
400 milligram weekly. On the first day it is 400 milligram BD, and then you take 400 milligram weekly.
Weekly for how long, sir?
Till the pandemic.
Till the pandemic is over.
Till the
Till the
pandemic.
pandemic is over.
Okay.
Initially they had stated they had sold it to use, but now
thinking that pandemic will be over in 4 to 8 weeks.
Yes.
Therefore now they are
Nirmal sir,
I
there is
also
a question for you. Why N95 valve respirator mask should not be used by the public? Recently there was a concern by the Ministry of Health. So will you please explain?
A very simple answer, madam, for this. When they start using this, what you call it as hospital, things outside the public, outside the hospital, the public start using it, will get a shortage, and it has been found that there was a shortage in the healthcare workers. So those things which the healthcare worker will get protected. So it should be available in the hospital settings where the corona or may not be in non-COVID.
He's talking about the mask with the valve.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Mask with the valve.
Yes.
Mask with the valve.
Mask with a valve
Is it, does it increase, sir, does it increase the propagation of the virus?
Yes,
Because
It expels
a one-way
the air
valve.
outside.
Yes,
It expels
exhaled
the air from inside, but because there is no filter for the expelled air,
Yes.
when you inhale the air, there is a filter, so you get a filtered air. But
Exactly.
you exhale an unfiltered air, which can send virus to the people.
Viruses.
to others.
Yes. So,
One
This is
sir,
a
correction,
hypothetical
Gauri,
everything.
and one correction, Gauri, it should not be used by even healthcare workers also.
Yeah.
You said only common man. The with valves, no mask should not be used by either healthcare worker or either by the common man.
no,
Nobody should use it.
in the ICUs, won't it give better protection where
No.
it's not
No,
a
no.
aerosol?
No.
In the ICU and as well as in the ward, you are supposed to use the mask which is without the filter.
Yes.
Yes.
Everywhere. Even outside. Nobody
Where
should.
we should,
When outside, that's
where we should be using the respirator mask with valve.
You cannot be Not
Only,
using
No,
it.
nowhere.
only in
Nowhere.
case of,
Nowhere.
only in case
Then
of
it should not be manufactured at
pollution
all.
or atmospheric pollution, not in a diseased state.
Where the dust is.
Yes.
That can be used
Though-
in industrial areas and
though it
industrial
is-
settings. That means.
Nowadays, that should not be used even in the industrial setting because when till the pandemic is over. So nowhere with valves, mask should be used anywhere. Should not be
Joshi,
used in.
Joshi sir, is there any role of antibiotics?
No, there is no role of antibiotics. Antibiotics can be used in patients who are in moderate or very severe category, but for preventing co-infection. Now, co-infection, as per WHO norms booklet, they have said it occurs in only 8% of patients who have COVID-19. So there is no role of prophylactic antibiotics. But many of these patients may develop bacterial infections, and many times we have to do procalcitonin along with C-reactive protein. And if the procalcitonin is normal, then I think there is no role of antibiotics. When we give tocilizumab and other things, we may have to, if the patient is intubated and has a lot of veins and everything, the chances of infection in our setup is slightly more than what has been reported from Western countries, where the aseptic precautions are very meticulously followed. Here in our setting, we really don't know. I think as per norms from the Western countries, it should not be used. But in our setup, I think things may be different. But still, procalcitonin is a good guide whether to start antibiotics or not.
And what is the role of steroids, sir?
Steroids are very important. Steroid, I'll tell you, recovery trial has shown that IV dexamethasone, 6 milligrams IV once a day for 10 days. The only drug in COVID-19 which has mortality benefits. There has been no other drug which has shown mortality benefits. Steroids should not be used in patients who are not desaturating. Patients whose SpO2 is more than 94% should not receive steroids without any. And if a person who is desaturating, that means his SpO2 is less than 94%, is a moderate grade category, has a pneumonia, this patient should be started on steroids, and that to low dose. The recovery trial has very clearly shown that it is the low dose steroids, not high dose, of only 6 milligrams of dexamethasone given IV OD for 10 days. That was the dose used in the recovery trial. Even higher doses which are used in methylprednisolone are not indicated. And this has shown mortality benefits. If it was, and it has, the recovery trial also very clearly showed that if it is used in patients who are not desaturating, the mortality, it has an adverse effect. So if you give steroids to a person whose saturation is more than 94%, who is not desaturating, if you start steroids, it has an adverse outcome, because steroids is a double-edged sword. It helps, it decreases the immunity, and it helps the propagation of the virus and cause secondary infections. At the same time, if the person is going into cytokine storm, it helps these patients. And therefore, it should be used very judiciously in patients with moderate pneumonia whose SpO2 is less than 94. We start dexamethasone 6 milligrams OD because that's an evidence-based molecule.
I have a
Sir,
question for Dr.
patients-
Archana Deshpande.
Yes.
In spite of wearing full PPEs, why your residents are getting so much infected?
Perfect question, sir.
Yes, that's. I also feeling that what is the cause. One might be, there might be some breach in one problem with our institute is that they give us 4 masks. Okay, they give us 4 masks for the 16-day duty. They ask us to use 1 mask as AIMS protocol for 1, 2, 3, 4, and on the 5th day again the first one. Okay. So what I feel is that when they wear the PPE and they come out of the COVID area, even that mask is a weight mask. So maybe it's like a breach in the PPE. One cause which I feel that. So every day the mask should be changed. That should be the thing. But getting a very less supply of the mask, that could be the one thing which we are getting infected. And secondly, when these people, the residents, they are at one hostel, or even the residents, if I am working with them, so some of us is infected, then other people are infected, because what the thing is that we wear masks near the patient. We wear masks when you are caring for the patient, but we don't wear masks when you are taking food. So when the MARD hostel, if they are taking food, nobody can have a mask and all. So maybe the distance plus minus 1 meter hota hi hai ki nahi, it's a difficult thing. Like there is some example, when they are doing duty, they are kept at the CP hotel, Center Point Hotel. 2 people in one room. So if one is infected, the other is going to be infected. The buffet is at the lounge. So everybody is taking food at a particular period of time. So a lot of people coming together. So one might be some breach in the PP because of wet mask. Second might be they are infected when they are not caring for the patient also.
I think what you said is absolutely correct. I am now posted in IGMC, and 11 residents in medicine and 1 lecturer in medicine are infected. So it's a very high number, and it's very unfortunate. That has reduced the workforce and there is a crunch of workforce. There are more than 400 patients admitted now in IGMC. A lot of problems, many deaths are occurring, and therefore this should be avoided. There is a global audit. There is an paper which has come from US, which shows that which audited of where the infections occur. And people who go inside the wards, COVID ward, and do the 8-hourly duty, they have to change the 8 hours. They are always given fresh N95 mask and full PP always. But people who work in the OPD and other areas, they are given 4 or 5 masks for 20 days. So they have can usually use it till, as per the AIMS protocol. But the audit published in the US clearly shows that the infection there occurs in areas where the precautions are not taken, where they are off guard, and not in the COVID areas. That is there. But what we are finding in the residents is that probably what Dr. Archana Deshpande showed is very correct, that once they are quarantined in the hotel, there they may not be taking adequate precautions. Second is when the patients are on mask and NIV, these patients have to go to near the patient they always remove the mask. This is very uncomfortable for NIV patients. They always wear tight fitting and they're very uncomfortable. They always remove it and they desaturate, and therefore this nursing staff does nothing. It is the resident who goes and again fit.
Yes.
And therefore that is the point. Agree with you, sir. Very frequently. That is another point where they can get it.
Roshi sir, I wanted to ask something.
What I feel is that government should not be spending money on ventilators. Government should spend money on at least masks, because that is the only thing available and that is the only thing which is protective nowadays. So even if I was working in the COVID, I have been given 4 masks only for a period of 16 days. So that is not acceptable actually.
COVID ward, all of them are given N95 masks daily. They have to change.
Daily mask you are giving, sir?
Yes.
Here they are not giving us daily. COVID only.
They have to change it every day. Not in when they are seeing non-COVID.
Yeah, you have to change it every day.
Yeah,
Joshi sir, the patients who present with features of happy hypoxia, do they suffer end organ damage also because the oxygen level is
happy very low? Or silent. It's better called silent because there is nothing to be happy about hypoxia.
Yes, sir.
Silent hypoxia.
Silent hypoxia, yes.
Because they suddenly the SpO2 is 60% and they are
yes, sir.
Shortness of breath or anything. And these patients can suddenly deteriorate. It's very important, and therefore the importance of SpO2 monitoring and importance of importance of doing the 6-minute walk test or a 3-minute walk test. That's very important because.
But do they have hypercapnia also? Because generally when there is hypoxia.
Yeah. What happens is that they are used to low levels of oxygen. And the respiratory center probably adapts to that low level and does not respond. That is one of the reasons what has been thought of by why these patients do not develop dyspnea with hypoxia. But there are all postulations on these things. We really don't know why is hypoxia or silent hypoxia occurs, but it's fairly common. It needs to be detected in order to prevent further damage, and these patients can deteriorate rapidly and can also die.
Sir, what kind of fluid management strategy do you follow? Because earlier we used to think that this is ARDS, a wet lung kind of condition. So we should keep the patient a little on the dehydrated side. But now, again, we think that no, we should be hydrating the patient properly. So what is the fluid management strategy that you follow in the ICUs?
Hydration should be there. There is no question about it. If the patient needs, if the patient goes into ARDS, then of course, fluid deprivation is keeping the lungs dry should be the policy. I think Nirmal would be the better person. He is
I think he has left, sir. I think he has left.
We have another session at 6, I think.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so
Sir,
much.
this question is for Meena Mishra ma'am. Sir, in RT-PCR, what is the CT value and its value as well as interpretation in prognosis of the patient?
Hello.
Yes, Meena Mishra ma'am.
Sir, the CT value basically, there are different kits which give different CT values. Now, by CT value we mean the cycle threshold for each cycle of PCR that goes in. Now, the upper cutoff value, it ranges somewhere between 36 to 40. So it is a very crude indicator of the viral load. It is said that if the higher the CT value, lower may be the viral load, but this cannot be taken as a dictum. It could be a very crude indicator, but CT value, they refer to the cycle threshold for both the E gene and the specific gene. It may be the N gene or the RDRP gene or the ORF gene.
So if suppose this CT value is more than 40 or 35, can this patient be treated in non-COVID hospitals? Again, the situation is the same. Because there is low or negligible virus load over there.
Yes, yes. Sir, यहाँ पर एक बहुत important बात है कि when we give the report as positive or negative, so we take into consideration the graph and the CT value, because both of them, they are important. And at times it may so happen that it may be on the higher side, but if the graphs are very good, we label them as positive. So basically it will be the laboratory which will be giving the CT values, and that will be again based, the positive or negative report will be based upon the graph that we see. है ना? And then sir, and higher CT value का वहाँ पे problem तब आएगा कि जब E gene तो positive है लेकिन RDRP positive नहीं आया है, मतलब RDRP या N gene जो specific gene रहते हैं, they don't come positive, then in that condition that is an issue.
So what is the importance of biochemical marker in COVID diagnosis and treatment? Dr. Archana Deshpande.
Biochemical markers we do in CRP, then ferritin, then D-dimer, LDH. One thing is that if the biochemical markers, they are very much raised, it tells you that it's a higher inflammatory response by a body. So if patient is desaturating with the high markers, then as sir said that it could be remdesivir can be given, or very high markers, these patients can be managed by tocilizumab also. So we repeat the markers 48 to 72 hours to be on proper time this drug patient should receive. So if the markers are high, there is a higher inflammatory, it tells you that there is a higher inflammatory response. And as they say that cytokine storm most common in 7 to 8 on 7 to 8 day. And if you can pick up at a proper time of thing, these biologicals or these drugs can make a difference. That's why you need to go for CRP, D-dimer, LDH. If the D-dimer is high, it tells you that there might be the hypercoagulable state, and these patients may need heparin and LMWH also. So if the D-dimer are very high, then you need to give it in BD doses. If the D-dimer is not that high, then you can plan as a OD doses. So the markers tell you that might be the time for the specific antiviral drugs, or that might be the time for giving the steroids and heparin.
Okay, this question for Dr. Anand Kate, sir. So what is the role of CT and MRI in the COVID patients?
CT and MRI is, you can consider it as a diagnostic procedure most of the time, CT chest usually, because many a times, even if you have a COVID RT-PCR negative, and if your CT scan shows changes of COVID pneumonia, I think that should be, the patient should be treated as a COVID case, and you can start the treatment. Probably your RT-PCR may come positive later on. Then CT and MRI also, getting a repeat CT and MRI also shows you, CT also shows you that whether the lung affection is increasing or it is recovering. So it can also show, and it can also guide you further treatment for the COVID pneumonia. And probably nowadays it's also been said that these patients at a later date, those who had suffered from COVID pneumonia, probably they'll end up in pulmonary fibrosis. That also you need to do a CT scan to evaluate the extent of lung damage.
Sometimes I feel that can we put
No
the
MRI,
patient, I have a question to all, whether
Even
these patients, they develop pulmonary fibrosis.
Pardon?
I have a question to Joshi sir. When patients, they develop pulmonary fibrosis after the COVID recovery, so can we give them some trial of steroids like interstitial lung disease, which we give for a period of 6 to 8 weeks to prevent the fibrosis? I don't know. Yes. I have asked, that is in my idea, to prevent the fibrosis, can we use steroids?
Joshi sir.
Yeah, the fact that we are getting these cases of pulmonary fibrosis, people have reported from KMN. Even in IGMC, I was not there, but then there was one patient who developed pulmonary fibrosis, who in fact took a very long time to come out of his oxygen requirement, and subsequently his CT showed that he had pulmonary fibrosis, a very severe category type of patient. So we do get late complications of pulmonary fibrosis, and whether steroids will help or not, it seems logical that pirfenidone, or which is used in interstitial lung disease, or whether to use steroids or not in higher doses than what has been advocated for cytokine storm, would help or not. We have to go by physiological rationale rather than by evidence base.
So rationally, I think rationally we are right if you put them on the steroids, even if you're giving steroids for treatment also, no?
Not for treatment. This is to prevent long-term complications after the patient has recovered.
No, sir. I am saying that when patients, we are putting them on methylprednisone or dexamethasone low dose. So even at that time, we are treating them with the low-dose steroids. So can we have 6 to 8 weeks of maybe a 40 mg in the tapering doses may prevent the fibrosis? That is my idea. I don't know. Nobody said in that way, but I just thought that it can prevent.
Good hypothesis needs to be tested.
The patient on ACE inhibitors or on ARBs, how it is going to affect as far as the susceptibility to this infection is concerned or the recovery is concerned?
Joshi sir.
Patients who are on ACE inhibitors or on ARBs, how it is going to be? Question to sir, anybody? Kate sir, you can answer.
No, let Dr. Joshi answer.
Joshi sir, yes sir.
This is a quite well-established fact that initially when this virus infection occurred, there were reports that ACE inhibitors and this angiotensin receptor blocker should not be used for hypertension, because the point of entry of the virus is through these through these receptors. So there was some concern. But subsequently, a lot of bodies, international bodies, American Cardiology Society, American Hypertension Society, British Hypertension Society, they issued guidelines that there is no evidence to suggest that these ACE inhibitors are harmful in COVID patients, or angiotensin receptor blockers are harmful, and they should be used. And there is no evidence of any that. And in fact, if you stop ACE inhibitors, that would lead to more problems, because the blood pressure may shoot up and alternative drugs are not there. So the recommendations are very clear, very categorical, and that they should be continued to be used.
Has it shown any beneficial effects recently, sir? ACE inhibitors.
What has been shown?
ACE inhibitors has been shown to have some beneficial effect in COVID pneumonia.
Beneficial effect? No, I'm not aware of that. No, I'm not aware.
I have gone through some trials. They are telling us that those who are on ACE inhibitors, they have like more recovery and a less severe course. I don't know. There are plus minus evidences, you know, but few studies they are saying that
what they say is continuing on ACE inhibitors, it gives you vasodilatation, and vasodilatation improves the blood supply, and it
improves the blood supply. Yes,
the recovery of the patient.
This question is for Dr. Joshi sir. So, what is cytokine storm and why patient die in COVID?
Actually, cytokine storm, as Dr. Archana Deshpande clearly mentioned, that it usually occurs when the patient's viral load has decreased. Viral load decreases by the end of first week. Therefore, antivirals are to be used in first week. After 10 days, there is no role of antivirals. And it is at that point when hyperinflation takes over. And the symptoms which occur after the first week are usually driven by these inflammatory markers. And these inflammatory markers are where there is also known as cytokine release syndrome, or also known as a hyperinflammation syndrome. And there is a response, the body produces a lot of dysregulated cytokines, and this causes harm to the body. It results in high-grade fever, body ache, joint pain, just like flu-like syndrome. And plus it leads to multiple organ damage. It leads to lung injury, it leads to acute kidney injury, it leads to acute liver injury, and it can lead to shock also, and patients can die because of that cytokine storm. And therefore, this patient should be started on tocilizumab if there is no secondary bacterial infection. And if the steroids are not working, steroids are good anti-inflammatory agents. They can be used for a cytokine storm. But these patients have already on steroids, and then we should add tocilizumab. Tocilizumab has anecdotal evidence that it works very nicely, and patients who are going into cytokine, where we find the indications are very clear. CRP should be more than 3 times or more than 40. The IL-6 should be more than 3 times is normal, and more than 100 is definite indication. Ferritin levels more than 3 times normal. If these are elevated and patient has no secondary infection, no PCT is normal, procalcitonin is normal, and patient has normal counts, has no thrombocyte, no leukopenia. In that situation, the patient should be put on tocilizumab, and there is anecdotal evidence, but not from randomized controlled trial, that it works wonders. People who have received tocilizumab at the right time in the right dose has shown that it works very nicely.
Rafat, I think we are underusing Dr. Meena Mishra.
Yes.
Because her field is very special, sir.
So I'll like to ask her a question. Madam, there are different mortality rates and different infectivity rates all around the world. What are the types of viruses, or rather the type of viruses, for me it's okay, which cause more mortality, and what is the strain of virus which we are experiencing in Nagpur and around us, or in Maharashtra and India?
Okay. Sir, there are different studies which are going on, and in which they are studying the different clades of the viruses. They are basically European clades or Southeast Asian clades. But actually, then there are some clades which are associated with high mortality. Like 2 months back, it was in news that the people from Indore, they were experiencing high mortality because the particular strain that was acquired from some other country as compared to those which were acquired from Mumbai. So these are the different strains, but right now, like I don't have any study of such type going on in AIIMS, let's say.
Well, what are the difficulties the world is facing in developing a vaccine, and how effective will be the vaccine when it is developed?
Actually, for vaccine development, now again, there are multiple issues. Number one, that this virus is known to undergo mutations. Then number two, that this is really a very novel virus. Like for any vaccine to be effective, there has to be a demonstrable efficacy in the terms of antibody titers. So till that time that we don't have the sufficient human trials giving rise to results of showing efficient efficacy, I think we have to wait for a while. I say.
What's your take on the Russian vaccine which has already come?
Sir, P.P. Joshi, sir.
I just want to comment on that Russian vaccine which has been just announced, and also the ICMR vaccine which was going to be launched on 15th. I think what is very unfortunate that in Russia there, and between Russia and US, there has been a lot of competition who comes out with the vaccine as fast as possible. But the problem is that according to that, what Russia did is that they said that it can be approved without phase 3 trial. I mean, phase 1, preclinical animal trials, phase 1 trials where the safety is concerned, and phase 2 trials where doses are adjusted, and then phase 3 is the trial after which usually any drug or any vaccine is approved. Now, what Russia did is they passed a legislation that for coronavirus there is no need of phase 3 trial, and they have approved the vaccine without a phase 3 trial. Now, whenever a vaccine is being approved, it is very important. What is prime importance is safety, because we are giving vaccine to a healthy person. We do not want any unhealthy, any side effects of that vaccine. Unfortunately, and this for vaccine trials, phase 3 trials, and long-term follow-ups, and whether the antibodies develop and whether these antibodies persist for 3 months, more than how long, and whether these neutralizing antibodies actually are protective or not. These things have to be tested, and this cannot be tested within a time frame of 2 or 3 months. And therefore, it is very unfortunate that because there is a lot of commercial interest and also because a lot of fight going on, and we do not want to come out with a vaccine which is harmful and which might have side effects and which is not efficacious. So there are a lot of things which are going to that, and I don't think it is possible to develop a vaccine in so short time. Basically, vaccine is given to patients to people who are healthy. We do not want any side effect of that vaccine to develop. That is and safety is prime importance. This is also very important, and also whether the long-term effects antibodies are present will develop or not. All three things are very important. And what Russia and these people are doing, I think, without launching this vaccine, without phase 3 trials, is something which is not acceptable for this community. And we are giving to a drug, to a disease which has a mortality of 1%. Majority of patients recover. And if you have some side effect, one side effect which can only be picked up by phase 3 trials or in post-marketing surveillance, we will be doing more harm than good.
Sir, I think we will have to have another session because there are many questions in the chat box we can see, but we will not be able to continue because of this time constraint. So we'll have another session. But please stay back, sir. We have CEO of DG Shield. He is going to tell us something very important. It is in this COVID times.
Just 1 minute. We have another session on at 6 p.m. with another webinar. Myself and Nirmal Jaswar are participants in it. Can we take leave, please? Because I'm getting a lot of phone calls from Dr. Dinesh Singh.
Thank you very much, sir. It has been a privilege having you here with us. Thank you very much, sir.
Right now. Thank you.
Nirmal sir. Joshi sir.
Sorry for leaving.
Thank you very much. We enjoyed the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I will stay, others to please stay back with us. Mr. Dipen Mehta, he is the CEO of DG Shield. He is going to tell us something very important, that is practice of telemedicine, which we can really increase our areas of practice, as we will not have geographical barriers, but then there are many glitches in it. So he is going to answer a few questions of ours. May I request Mr. Dipen Mehta to please come in?
Yes.
Hi, Dipen.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, doctor. Hello.
So what is your judicial technology? Can you tell us about that technology, please?
Yeah. Basically, we have developed an application in which doctor can do teleconsultation, online appointment booking. You can digitalize the prescription. Patient will receive the soft copy of the prescription. The doctor can even maintain their medical records. Even doctor can take online payment collection. Because nowadays, due to COVID situation, many of the doctors are afraid that the patient who is visiting to his clinic might be a risk of COVID or not. So we have developed an AI-based power solution in which patient has to fill some details in 15 to 17 medical parameters. After filling the 14 to 17 parameters through our AI-based application, doctor will get the result of the patient as a if a patient is of high risk of COVID or low risk of COVID. So accordingly, doctor can do the consultation through teleconsultation, video consultation, non-in-person consultation. Once the consultation is done, doctor can get the payment through online. Online appointment booking is also there. and many more EHR facilities are there in the application. And the application is available on Google Play Store and iOS App Store. So it's available free for the doctors. So I would request doctors to download and start using it. It's very easy to use and it's very effective for the doctors in current situation.
Thank you, Dipen.
Sir, one question.
Yes.
How does the patient know that he has to use that application and the particular doctor has that application?
So basically, patient doesn't need to download any application. Once doctor book the appointment of the patient will receive the SMS of the link of the prescription and teleconsultation. So patient has just click on the link, need to fill the details and need to do the consultation with the doctor. So the application is only for the doctors, not for the patient. So everything is based through SMS for the patients.
One
patient pay in this application.
One small suggestion: make the payment gateway before the consultation.
Yes, so we have the option. So what will happen is that when doctors book the appointment, patient will receive the SMS of the COVID risk link and for the payment link. So once the patient makes the payment, then doctor can do the consultation. So like if suppose a doctor has done the consultation and patient has not made the payment, so patient will not receive the prescription unless the patient makes the payment. So prescription link being only generated once the payment has been received by the doctor.
Thank you, Dipen. So with this, we conclude the session. I request our secretary, Dr. Rajesh Savarbande, to give formal vote of thanks.
Hello everyone. I, Dr. Rajesh Savarbande, on behalf of IIM Nagpur, thanks to Dr. Anand Kate sir. Thanks to Dr. Anand Kate sir, Senior Consultant of Critical Care, and Dr. P.P. Doshi sir, Professor and HOD, General Medicine, AIIMS Nagpur, for being here as a speaker in their busy schedule. I would like to thank Dr. Archana Deshpande ma'am, Associate Professor and General Medicine, GMC Nagpur, and Dr. Nirmal Jaiswal sir, Senior Critical Care Consultant, Intensivist and President of AMS Nagpur. I extend my gratitude to Dr. Meena Mishra, who is Professor and HOD of Microbiology Department, AIIMS Nagpur. Dr. Prakash Dev sir is from Task Force, and all the participants who are participated in this webinar for sparing their valuable time. I am also thankful to our moderators, Dr. Rafat Khan sir and Dr. Gauri Arora ma'am. Also, today's host, Mr. Sanket Barele, and who is founder and chairman of DigiShield, and CEO of Mr. Dipen Mehta, for their tireless efforts to success of this webinar. Once again, I am very thankful to all the panelists of the webinar. Thank you. Thanks for me.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, IIM Nagpur.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Archana.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.